when a navvy needs to get around. Here's your look at the McFarlane toys, Avatar, Jake, Sully, and Skimwing. Right into battle against the RDA with Jake atop his powerful Skimwing. The large deluxe set features a highly detailed 1.25-inch Jake Sully action figure, articulated posable Skimwing, special world builder stand, and bioluminescent effect when placed under black light. While Jake responds to attacks from the RDA, I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the Avatar, Jake Sully, and Skimwing that we could have a look at in this video. I have already taken the liberty of putting everything together. I'll, of course, show you guys how everything goes together in a moment, but it's also to help me also show you guys how big everything is once you put everything together. Because the Skimwing really doesn't technically get displayed on its own, it's best to kind of put everything together first. Then from there, I'll grab my tape measure and I'll show you guys exactly how tall it stands. With that in mind, if you count including Jake Sully, then you're looking at the total display of the piece being about 6 3/4 of an inch tall, or it's going to be about 17 centimeters in height. Now, from there as well, what I can also do is take the Skimwing off, just attach it from the ball joint. There we go. And then if you guys wanted to see how big and how wide this is, this may be a little bit harder to pull off here. Grabbing the tape measure once again, let's get this in inches. From wingspan, at least the total wingspan of Skimwing, you're looking at the creature being about 8.5 inches in length or width, and being about 22 centimeters wide. From the length of it, though, at least, again, this was all something that I was hoping that was going to work a little bit better, but from the end of its tail to the front of its snout, the Skimwing is about 9 inches long, or it's about 23 centimeters in length. One thing I also really like about these smaller sets is the fact that they scale well with the other RDA vehicles. Now, we have only looked at one of them here on this channel, which we will be looking at more in upcoming videos. But in the meantime, though, this is what the Skimwing looks like size-wise to the RDA Sea Wasp. And when I also take off Jake Sully, as he is removable after all, and I also wanted to put it next to the sizing of the pilot, yeah, I would be safe to say that they're about the same size, at least scale-wise. Obviously, the avatars, the Na'vi, are going to be a lot bigger than humans, but I think they're about the same size to one another, making the vehicles being perfectly in scale with these smaller sets that McFarlane Toys have released. If you do break everything down, Jake Sully, the Skimwing, and then the diorama piece make up 3 component parts that all come together. The diorama actually, in fact, does have a little bit of assembly that's also required when you first take it out of its cardboard prison. We'll have a look at this, obviously, first. I have already taken the liberty of adding all the little sea things, the sea plants that attach onto the display base. I would have liked to have been able to remove these, but it seems like once you do plug them in place, you can see they're quite hard to then remove. Here's what they look like on the underside. Just to note as well, it looks as if all the 3 holes are of the same size. So you don't have to necessarily put them in the same place that I did. If you wanted, for example, for the larger, more neon green plant, you can in fact put it over here. You could put the purple plant over here. But I did like the sizing of this one, and it worked quite well for the size of the base. The base itself does have some nice coloring going for it. I mean, mostly it's a more dark charcoal gray, but they've brushed on there some really nice, bright, vibrant pinks. There's some blues, there's some greens, making up, again, all the sea life that's underneath the waters. The base itself is quite hollow, and then you get yourself a metal post here that plugs into the top of the base here. This is something I do wish, though, that, like, for example, the Sea Wasp could have came included with. Something small like this, but just simply being a post that could attach onto the underside of the vehicle. Then you do take yourself the Skimwing, just not to move the base in the process. And the Skimwing, if you look at the bottom of the creature, there's actually quite a large hole that then plugs onto this. And being that this is also a ball joint, it does allow the creature to move around. You can actually move it up and down and all that stuff that we'll talk more about in a moment. We also did want to look at Jake Sully. Jake Sully, though, doesn't have a lot of articulation to speak of. He does have some decent detailing for, again, the sizing of the figure. Again, you can make out there's still eyes. You even managed to put the little stripes there on his face and the rest of his body. It's a well-painted figure for, again, how small the figure actually is. Articulation, though, again, is very limited on this figure. There's head articulation. The shoulders themselves actually do hinge out, which I was kind of surprised to see. I just expected, really, the arms to be able to swivel back and forth. But no, in fact, they actually do hinge out also as well. The figure has waist articulation. The figure also has leg articulation, and the figure does have no tail articulation, but at least it's a softer plastic. Now, when you are attaching this onto the C-wing, the Skimwing, I should say, you can see like the antenna pieces really serve also to be like saddle holders, basically the straps in which he's going to hold on to. When you are putting Jake down, you have to kind of put it in between the wings. So you just want to move Skimwing's wings out of the way, and then you just take Jake Sully, large feet and all, and you sort of have to just kind of wedge him inside the wings. Now, you're not going to attach both the hands. One hand is actually relaxed on Jake. The other one is actually the gripping hand. So the gripping hand is the thing that you're going to hold on to the top antenna. And then from there, you can kind of just pose Jake Sully's hand. So he's technically only flying by holding the creature by one hand alone. But it does look quite good, really, when you have the figure on top of it. And that's just Jake Sully alone. When you actually look at the details that they've actually put here into Skimwing, it's a really interesting looking creature. It sort of looks like it's part dragon, part almost monarch butterfly, or even just any kind of butterfly, really. The print work that they put on just the wings alone, very elaborate looking detailing done. Now, again, all of these have the bioluminescence. So, for example, if you do happen to have yourself like a black light, you take the black light and you can shine it across it. Now, it's not actually shining these parts, the brighter green aspects. What it's doing instead is it's brightly lighting the little spots that are around it. Sort of these tiny little spots, these little markings you can see glow in a brighter color of blue. It's all across really the wings. I mean, I'm downplaying it by really only just showing it here, but it's not until you actually move out to the outer span of the wings that you see there's a lot more of it happening there as well. There's nothing on that I can see, at least, on Jake Sully himself. Everything is more so on the actual creature. And again, when you see it on this side, there's a lot of that cool bioluminescence, that sparkle here on the creature's wings. It's also here on the back of its fins, this spike that runs, or I should say this fin that runs along the top of its tail does also illuminate as well when you run the black light across it. Also in the tail, you can see there's some additional markings there on the side of the tail as well, and that's also on both sides of the creature. To flip it on the underside, there's really nothing happening on the bottom of it. It's all mostly here in the actual side of the wings and all down the side of the tail as well. So that's pretty cool, the fact that they would be able to do that. The creature, surprisingly enough, not only does have some decent detailing done to it. First of all, you can see the head sculpt there. A tiny, tiny little eye. The fact that they put as much points of paint, get tongue-tied here, as much as points of paint that they did put into Skimwing. I mean, really, like the paint's pretty clean. You can see the tiny little teeth, the little beads of yellow there for the eyes themselves, and all this nice spot work that they put across from the end of its snout to the end of its tail. Speaking of the end of its tail, without getting any more tongue-tied, there's actually holes on the bottom of this to indicate that the tail, in fact, does have a wire frame. So you can move it. Can't move it much, though. You can only move it to about that much and that much on either side. Of course, you will want to be careful because these are actually independently ball-socketed in place. When it comes to actually the articulation on the figure, this Skimwing actually does have the head that actually is on a ball joint, so you can move it up and down. You can only move it so much. There's only so much more mileage you can get from this, because obviously the further down you move this, you may actually pull Jake Sully down in the process. But the head does move up and down. You can rock it back and forth. Technically, you could also rotate it as well. But as you're rotating it, you're going to, of course, detach Jake Sully from the top of it. Maybe we'll just leave him off for the rest of this. The wings themselves are also on ball joints. And while this is actually a softer plastic for the main body of the creature, the wings themselves are more of a harder plastic. And like I said, they are in ball joints, so you can hinge them up and down. Technically, you could rotate them all the way around as well. But really, really nice the fact that they put that much articulation into this, because really, ideally, they could have just made this a staction figure, but they didn't. In addition to that, slightly smaller wings here on the back, further back here on the tail. Again, harder plastic, but they also do have tiny, tiny little ball joints, so you can move those around as well. I really like the design of this one quite a lot. I was always one when I was a kid, loved the tiny micro-sized vehicles, micro-sized, like the Micro Machines, for example. Tiny little cities. You almost just wondered what little tiny inhabitants lived in those cities. I kind of like the idea that they've replicated this with a smaller scale diorama. It's not there certainly as much for play value. It's, I think, more so for display value. And again, one thing, I just dropped the wing down below on the floor. When you are plugging in place, that actually does bring up an interesting point. When you are plugging this down onto the ball joint, Just be careful you don't clip the wings in the process. I already clipped one. Let's hope I don't clip the other one in the process. But because you actually do put it on top of a ball joint, that allows you also as well to move Skimwing up and down. You can also move it back and forth as well. So if you want to have kind of a more kind of low flying down creature, you can also pull that off rather successfully because of course it does have the ball joint. Mind you, it would look a lot more impressive if I didn't have the wing fall off like this, but it's certainly something I will fix in final looks. Retrieving the wing and putting it back on Skimwing, we can finally have a look at the creature and Jake Sully atop of it here in final looks. I really like how this one all came together. Granted, it didn't work that at the end of this video, I did end up losing the wing, but I knew exactly where it fallen onto the floor, so I was able to put it back in place. That the beauty, at least, of this is not only is that it may look like it's a staction figure, a staction display piece, but in actual fact, Skimwing has much more articulation than I was really expecting. Ball joints in the head, ball joints in the larger wings in the front, and smaller wings also in the back get afforded that same ball joint. So you can actually pose it in different ways. And I do also like the way it plugs onto a display base where it attaches not by a peg, but rather a ball joint. So you can actually angle the creature in different ways that you have it on the shelf. Now this is actually a smaller piece to a bigger puzzle. In fact, all of the creatures and all the smaller plant life animals and diorama things that McFarlane's are going to be putting out all kind of collaborate together. You can all put the pieces together and get a much larger land space of where the creatures and the people of Na'vi all inhabit. Now, this one also does work quite well with the vehicles. Again, going back to, though, the vehicle, the RDA Sea Wasp that we looked at in earlier review, I did wish that this could have followed the same suit of what we got here with the Skimwing, that they didn't necessarily need to include, like, the kind of similar plant life that we got here with the Skimwing, but at the very least, I do wish that the vehicles, especially the one that fly, could have come with a similar type of display stand system. It didn't have to necessarily be a ball joint. It didn't have to be something where you had a large base, a really elaborate base, but at the very least, just a post system like this, where you could have attached things like the Sea Wasp in air, rather than actually just having it sitting on the shelf. The colors on this one are quite vibrant, and once again, you get that bioluminescence. That work only, unfortunately, if you have yourself a black light, and hopefully it presented itself well enough in this review to show you that there's a lot more going on here than what you may see with your naked eye. Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the Avatar, Jake, Sully, and Skimwing that we could have a look at in this review. I may have said Skimwing. It's Skimwing. But either way, though, what do you guys think of this set down below? Have you been collecting any of the smaller diorama sets for the new Avatar film? And if you have, which ones have you been picking up? Also, as well, if you enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you're loving the content you guys are seeing, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below and move on over to the bell notification. Because while we have wrapped up things right now for Jake, Sully, and Skimwing, there is going to be more Avatar reviews coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.